Welcome everybody to our fourth session of Interfaith Explorations. My name is Sophia Said. I am the Executive Director of the Interfaith Center, and I also serve as the chairperson of Medina Institute and Mosque. And it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you back. Actually, a lot of you to welcome you back because you have attended our last sessions. But I do see quite a few new faces. So if you have never been in one of these classes, I will give you a brief introduction before we move on to this fall session of programming. So Interfaith Center is a nonprofit which was started back in 2012, committed to the mission of reducing the fear and hatred among world religions. And we do that through several programming that we offer for all different age groups. So we have programs for teenagers, like a youth group. We have an annual summer camp for elementary school children, in which children from different faiths come together to enjoy 1 week of learning and fun. We have interfaith prayer services, which are specifically designed to bring people of different faiths together under one roof so they can share food, fellowship, wisdom, and prayers. Our largest annual interfaith prayer service was held on September 10th of this year, which was an event of music and wisdom. And I encourage you all to go to our YouTube channel. And if you have time, watch it. One of the key programs that we offer is educational classes, because we do believe that there is wisdom and beauty in every faith. And we offer these interfaith educational sessions so we can highlight that beauty from all the different faiths. So this Interfaith Exploration series, which we started last year, is part of that educational series. I would like you all to mute your mics if you're not speaking, because that will make it easier for you all to hear the speaker. So we have been very lucky that we have had Dr. J. McDaniels actually primarily lead these classes. I have the opportunity of co-teaching with him once in a while. So we started in last fall, and the first class that we offered was on world religions. And Dr. McDaniel has taught world religions for over 30 years at Hendrix College, for those who are not aware of it. And he is a gem, and I'm so glad that he is here with us so we can learn from his wisdom. So last fall, we focused on world religions. Earlier this year in the winter session, we primarily went into depth and learned more about Abrahamic faiths. In this spring and summer of 2020, our interfaith educational session was focused on different forms of religious experiences, like food and music and art. And we focused on them, and we learned about different people's spiritual journeys. And now in the fall, we have a unique session, which I'm really, really excited about. The session is called Spiritual Literacy, and we will be learning about spiritual alphabet, primarily focusing on or using the work of Frederick and Marianne Brussat as a resource. And I'm going to quickly share my screen to make sure you all receive this information from me. So I sent this website to you called Spirituality and Practice. This is the website that we will be using as resource, specifically this page that you see on your screen right now, Alphabet of Spiritual Literacy. That will be, we don't expect you to read all of it, but we do think it will be a wonderful resource. And especially since every week we'll be telling you that what letter we'll be doing, so you can take a few minutes and go to the website and read more about that letter. And before I give it to Jay and Marianne, we are very grateful to Marianne that you decided to co-sponsor this, this fall series, our 12 lecture series. We will be using your book and website both. Now, a little bit about the class format. So today's class, which is September 30th, and the next class, which is October 7th. These two sessions are primarily Introduction to Spiritual Literacy, and they will be taught by Marianne Brussat today and Dr. McDaniels and myself next Wednesday. After we are done with the Introduction to Spiritual Literacy, we will move into the actual alphabets. So starting from Wednesday, October 14th, Every week, we will have a guest speaker who will share their own personal story, or we will have a guest organization and we will share their story while focusing on that spiritual alphabet. So every class we will have new speakers who will bring in their own spiritual journeys, their artistic, musical, or faith journeys to us. And we'll be learning more and more about spirituality and practice at the intersection of these two. So, with that, Jay, I turn it over to you to introduce our guest speaker for today and start our session.
Well, great. And thank you, Sophia. It's so good to work with you, and good to see you. Good to see you. Last time I saw Sophia, it was on a Zoom meeting and she was in Pakistan. So you're closer now. I think you're in New Jersey now. Is that right?
Yes, I am in New Jersey.
Yeah. Well,
And as
it's great
soon
to be.
as the COVID has actually subsided, these classes used to be held at Medina Institute, which is our mosque. And we hope to go back there again one day, but it doesn't seem like in near future.
That's right. So I'm so delighted that Marianne Brussat has agreed to be with us today. Now, as Sophia said, I taught the world's religions at Hendrix College for a long time, 39 years. And somebody said, well, why didn't you go to 40? And I said, well, that seems like too long. So I stopped at 39. But I knew when I was teaching the religions that I was really interested not only in their beliefs and not only in their ritual practices, but in what qualities of heart and mind were important to them. And those qualities of heart and mind are really more than belief and more than ritual practices. And the more I got to know different religions, the more I realized different religions can have different qualities of heart and mind that are really important to them, but that can be shared with other religious traditions, but also these traditions are kind of good at it. So for example, if one is attention or mindfulness in the present moment without judgment, the Buddhists were pretty good at that. They were a little better than the Christians whom I knew, because I am one. If one was a sense of awe and wonder at a mystery greater than ourselves, well, I think the Abrahamic religious traditions all feel that. But I learned a lot actually from Islam, with its sense of something much greater than we are, in which we're small but included, and the sense of awe that can go along with that. And then I looked at Judaism, and I love so much of Judaism. Among things I like about Judaism was its sense of humor and playfulness. And I thought, oh, I sometimes wish there were a little more playfulness in my life and actually in my religion. I mean, we laugh, but it's not like you read the New Testament and there's all these invitations to laugh. It's not quite like that. But Judaism has almost a culture where humor plays a prominent role, even a sense of playfulness. That's about the time that I discovered the spiritual alphabet of Frederick and Marianne Brussat of Spirituality and Practice. And as soon as I saw the alphabet and really thought about the letters in the alphabet, I realized that they had managed to name the kinds of things that I was discovering within, but also beyond and between the world's religions. And a lot of my students were not religious, not religiously affiliated. They were spiritual independents, or spiritual but not religious in their language. But they knew those qualities of heart and mind. So I became a student of the spiritual alphabet. Indeed, I began to think, I think the Brussats are really onto something. And I'm grateful. And then I looked at their website, Spirituality and Practice, and I hope you'll go and explore that. It doesn't just have a spiritual alphabet. It has film reviews. They are among the best spiritually engaged film reviewers I know. Actually, they are the best. And there's probably not a movie that you've seen or heard about that you can't also read about if you go to their site. They love poetry. They love literature. So there's sections on literature. Marianne herself loves quotations. And there's a whole section of the website that gives you quotes, little quotes that you can use. They teach courses. They have online courses, e-courses, on almost anything you can think about. Jungian spirituality, dreams, contemplative practices, social justice, democracy. You can take those online courses. They're great. So I've become, in my next lifetime, I want to be a marketer for spirituality and practice. And champion it, because I think it's one of the most important things we've got going today. And I want to thank Marianne for being with us the rest of today and really introducing us to her and to the spiritual alphabet. Tell us how it came about, tell us a little more about it. And then Sophia and I will take over next week and dig into it in our way a little more. So Marianne, with that, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Jay. And thank you for all of your support and all of your interest and encouragement. It's really been great for us. Let me just start by talking a little bit about what we mean by spiritual practice. And then I'm just going to define a few terms here. You know, it's interesting. I think most of us have a few things that we do that we consider to be our spiritual practices. It could be that we regularly engage in prayer or some kind of chanting practice, or we may consider our work our volunteer work as our spiritual practice. I tend to think, because we have a very broad definition of spiritual practice, I tend to think that people are a lot more spiritual than they think they are. And so I just like to kind of say, well, what do we mean by that term? First of all, I think of it as ways in which we intentionally connect. And we connect, say, with something greater than ourselves, with, say, the divine, something that you might call this for a vertical connection, although I'm not one that thinks the divine is only up there. But practices also help us connect with the world around us. And this would include connecting with nature, connecting with animals, connecting with our neighbors, and to the whole creation, really. And then I think spiritual practices also help us connect with our true self, with our inner life, and who we really are, our authentic being. And so the practices that we look for and try to identify are things that have one of these connections: a horizontal connection, vertical connection, or an inner depth connection. And when we talk about the term spiritual literacy, which you're going to be exploring in this program, we're really talking about a way of reading our experiences, reading our connections for sacred meaning and purpose. So you think about the world around us, and it's full of signs of the presence of the Spirit. It's just full of signs and indications. But how do you learn to read those signs? What do you look for? Why would you identify something that happens to you as having some kind of sacred and spiritual meaning and purpose for you? And that's the key. How do you learn to read the world? It's an interesting, when we came up with the term spiritual literacy, we were talking to Thomas More, who you may know as the author of of Care of the Soul. And he mentioned that in the Middle Ages, the monks used to have a practice called reading the book of the world. And so they read their scriptures, and they may have read inspirational writing or poetry or something, but they also read the book of the world. What was nature saying to them? What were their encounters with people saying to them? And this became their way of being spiritually literate. You talk to, if you have any Native American friends, they may tell you about going out on a walk and trying to read signs. And that, again, that's another example of a spiritual literacy. Reading what are the animals telling you? What is the way in which the forest is presenting itself? What does that tell you? That's also spiritual literacy. And of course, I love the I don't have it handy, but I probably need to have this handy, is the whole idea in Islam that the world, everything is a letter from Allah to us, and all of these things are something that we can read and learn from. So when you think of spiritual literacy, it's not saying that you have to become familiar with a certain book list or a certain kinds of readings in order to be literate. It's not that. It's really about learning how to look through your experiences and recognize them, see them through this special lens of spiritual literacy. So this brings me to what happened with the alphabet. We got this book contract to do spiritual literacy based upon some publications that we had put out, in which we had collected small passages from books that we were reviewing that about, say, place or animals or things. And so we were looking for these illustrations of a spiritual take on everyday experience. And that was kind of like what the assignment was. And we'd put out some newsletters that had some of these passages in them. And we ended up putting the book together. There ended up being, I think, 650 passages that were spiritual takes on everyday life. And I have to admit, my husband Frederick he's the big reader in the family. And so he would read all these books and that he was reviewing and pull out all these passages that he had made copies of because he thought they were so interesting. And in doing that, he'd bring them together and we'd sit down and he'd read them to me. And he'd say, I think this one belongs in the chapter on community, and this one belongs in the chapter on relationships. And sometimes he would read something and I would say, yes, that's really, really beautifully written. I mean, I love that writer. And I just get chills. It's one of these aha passages. I really like it. But why is that spiritual? And he would say, well, because it's expressing gratitude, or, well, it's about wonder, or it's raising a question about justice, or it's demonstrating a compassionate look at another person. And so we just started writing down these words as they came up. And pretty soon we had a whole list of these, what Jay often refers to as qualities of heart and mind. We tend to refer to them as practices, but we had 37, it turned out. Our publisher, of course, immediately freaked out and said, well, you can't call it an alphabet if it has 37 because alphabets have 26 letters and you just can't do this. And we said, well, you try to choose between joy and justice. You try to choose between faith and forgiveness. You choose between transformation and teachers. So they finally agreed, though we did compromise, and there were a couple places where we wanted 3 things, and they said, well, you know, really. So that's why we don't have patience, because we already had peace and play, and so patience is now under hope in our minds. And there's another one. Generosity we wanted, but we had gratitude and grace, and so we ended up with our 37, and we basically began to work with those, to look at all of the passages in the book that way. To this day, we use these 37 qualities as a way to look at everything that we put on the website. So we actually cannot publish, we programmed the website so that every piece of content is tagged according to which of these practices it illustrates. There has to be a main practice, and then oftentimes there's 2 or 3 others that come in. And we can't publish the page unless we've identified the practice. And for us, it has become a real template on how we look at our experience, how we look at what we're reviewing or what we're writing about, and just a way of really seeing the world for us. It's our lens. It's our, we talk in the book about different filters on your experience. And for us, it's like we look through these 37 and to see what's happening in our life. Along the way, we discovered an interesting piece about the alphabet, which was that it was functioning, it could function as a bridge. And particularly in this day and age, I think it's really important that we find more ways to make connections, to bridge across divides, to, you know, especially as our culture and our society is becoming more and more polarized. So we've identified 4 different ways in which the alphabet functions as a bridge. One is that it's a bridge between the religions. So all of the religions, if you look at them, and Jay just gave some wonderful examples of some religions have more of an emphasis on certain of the practices than others, but all of the religions have practices and ways to, and they encourage things like gratitude. All of the religions have a devotional element of some kind. All of them have, most of them actually revolve around the concept that we need to have some kind of transformation, whether you're talking about being born again or being enlightened or being coming home. Any of these expressions are about the practice of transformation. So we can see that this, so certainly in interfaith work, it's a wonderful to have these things in your mind as you're working with people, because you realize, oh, that person may be talking about a specific belief and practice of their tradition, but that's very, very similar to the same way in which my tradition approaches, say, conflict. Then we approach it with attention. We figure out what it is. We approach it with an attitude of forgiveness. We might approach it with openness, so that we look and try to understand, try to have empathy, try to walk in someone else's shoes. So between the religions and in the interfaith work, this is very helpful. Another thing that we've increasingly discovered is that it's a bridge, the alphabet provides a bridge to the people that are not affiliated with the religion and yet still have a sense and a desire to be involved in a deeper way with themselves and with others and with something beyond themselves. So someone may very well call themselves spiritual but not religious, or we like the term spiritually independent. You can have, or they call them the nuns, the N-O-N-E-S, because that's what they check on the list of religion. But what we find is that a perfect example is that years ago, Oprah Winfrey on her show started talking about people keeping gratitude journals. And a lot of her audience would have been this group that called themselves spiritual but not religious. But gratitude journals, that was a great thing. You write down 3 things at the end of the day that you're grateful for every day. And if you have a hard time, I remember at one point, Oprah said, and then I couldn't think of anything, so I just said, well, I'm breathing. And that made the list. So when you look and you talk to people, and this is now probably 30% of the younger audience, the millennials and younger in the population would call themselves in this category. And yet they have tremendous spiritual practices. They have all kinds of things they're committed to. There are things that they aspire to and want to be, and that they connect with. And so there's a reason why, say, the mindfulness movement is so big these days. There's a reason why so many people are involved with the Charter for Compassion and trying to set up compassionate cities. These are universal practices of attention and of compassion or gratitude, and they connect with this audience, so, or this constituency or this group of people. Now then we discovered that from our own work that the alphabet provides a bridge to our culture and to the expressions of our culture. And so when we look at a movie, we will always categorize which practice it illustrates. And we will read a novel that way. We'll look at a piece of nonfiction. Pretty much what we're saying is that these cultural expressions of who we are and what we want and what we aspire to match these same qualities of heart and mind that we have in the alphabet. So just think about movies. When you have a movie, there's pretty much not a point in having the movie in most cases if something doesn't happen to the character over the course of the 2 hours. There's some kind of transformation going on usually, or they're falling in love, or they're making amends, or they're going through a process of forgiveness. So there is a way in which people travel in a movie, the way the storyline unfolds, that is illustrative of these qualities. Some movies may just be exposing us to beauty, but they're connecting with us because they're illustrating something that we really are looking for and wanting in our lives. So that's kind of one of the things we've worked on the hardest, I think, is making these connections to the culture. I mean, when we first started reviewing in the early 70s, we used to review rock music, and we would call up the record companies. We lived in New York City, and we'd say, well, we're coming over and we'd like to pick up, the latest records from the Stones, from the Rolling Stones, or from the Doors. And they would say, no, you don't want our department, you want the classical department. We'd say, no, that's what we want. We want the Stones. And so the same thing with the films. It's like we'll get these promotions and they want us to see the latest movie that they think is what Christians say are interested in. And we'll say, yeah, that's okay. We'll take a look at it. But also don't forget, we want to see this one and this one and this one. And so our view of what makes a spiritual movie, or what makes a movie spiritual, is maybe quite different than the expectations of those who are in the business of promoting movies. So we encourage people to open and broaden their understanding of what makes something spiritual their own experiences and also in their encounters with what's in the culture. And then the final bridge we have discovered recently, because we've been working on a project for a couple years that we call the Practicing Democracy Project. And what we're doing is we're identifying spiritual practices that can strengthen the democracy. And it's everything, you know, we have, there's a whole section on the website called Practicing Democracy Project, and it has downloadable guides to practicing democracy online, practicing democracy with children or in your faith community. There's one on interfaith engagement, a whole guide of different practices and different projects that you could do that are reinforcing democratic values. But in doing that, we have discovered that the alphabet is a very helpful bridge across divides, because people may define it slightly different, but they're still affirming the same thing. So take something like a simple example is the spiritual practice of reverence. This is a big one for us personally, and we actually have an entire project on the website about reverence. And part of that actually comes from our own background as Christian Sufis, because there's a whole emphasis in Islam on adab, which is a whole set of practices for respecting relationships. And and it was the thing that totally attracted us to Sufism, was actually all of these wonderful adab practices. And we realized that one of our key values personally is respect, having respect for actually radical respect is what we call it. And that's what reverence is. It's radical respect for humans, for the earth, for animals, and there are practices in the religions that emphasize respect. But now take a step out of the religion, say into the general population, and you realize that one of the key yearnings in our society these days is to be respected. Whether you're on the left or the right, whether you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, it doesn't matter. You really want to have people have respect for you. That you don't necessarily have to agree with all of the positions that others hold, but people want to be respected. They want to know that they're considered to be important and their values can be listened to. Maybe not necessarily agreed to, but accepted as their values. And so we have that. It's like one of our favorite teachers is Jamal Rahman, who's a Sufi teacher, and he's one of the Interfaith Amigos, if you've ever heard of them. And Jamal always talks about how you have to look at someone's essence, not at their behavior. And reverence is about that. That's having respect for someone's essence, and their essence is divine, and not, that's not saying that you're endorsing their behavior. So here in this very polarized situation that we're facing in the democracy work, we have found that the alphabet provides opportunities for bridging. No matter where you are on the political spectrum, you're grateful for something. No matter where you are on the political spectrum, you have had experiences where you've discovered the meaning of your life and others' lives. And so you can just pretty much go down the alphabet and you can say, oh yeah, they have that too. And so it is an important way of trying to understand our connections with other people. And remember, that's one of the purposes of spiritual practice, that it is your connection on that horizontal plane with other people or with the earth. So that's kind of the general introduction. I don't know how much more, do we want to open it to some questions now, or do we, if you let me share my screen for just a minute, I will show you a couple things. But actually, Sophia already did part of this, but if I can.
Do it again. I think we can,
Okay.
we can see it anew. Thank you.
You should be able to share your screen, Marianne.
Yeah, I am. I need to, I don't seem to have anything on my screen. Nope, don't want that. I'm actually looking for a place on I don't think I have my website open. Hold on a second.
While you do that, I will note that in the spiritual alphabet, T is for teacher.
Yes.
And what we just received from Marianne for the last 20 minutes was a wonderful example of that. That was so interesting, and we want more.
Good. Thank you. All right. Let me just, you don't need to see my Photoshop photos. Okay, let me start over again. I need to open something on my screen in order for it to be shared. Okay, let me go back and let me share screen. There it is. Okay, there we go. All right, can everyone see that?
There we go, yes.
Okay, so this is the website. This is what you get to when you go to spiritualityandpractice.com. And of course, up here at the top is the navigation bar. So there's all the different sections. Over here, the only place where it's not real obvious is over here on explorations. Explorations is where we have a number of different things. We have profiles of spiritual teachers. We have topics, that's all curated content. We have material on the different traditions. That's not all that we've covered. It's just sometimes our web team tells us not to make such long lists. We also have the Practicing Democracy project that I mentioned. That's there, as well as the Reverence project. So I do encourage you to, go there. If you, for instance, go to the Practicing Democracy project, we have right here just published a new guide to for a multi-faith prayer service for the nation. That's right here, and we have we have a collection of prayers for that, as well as a lot of like a sample format for and some tips on planning a multi-faith service. And this is a free, I hope that you'll find that useful. I also love this voting ritual. So it's how to dedicate the fingers of your hand to different constituencies. It's kind of moves along pretty fast here, but anyway, there's different guides and the other things that I have mentioned. And then a lot of our pages, you'll see these big lists of, this is for more resources. This is all curated content related to this topic, or in this case, to the Democracy Project. So it'll have spiritual practices. This program plan section will bring up all these different guides that we've developed, and as well as, like, here's the one on multi-faith engagement. And these are both online, but also you can download the PDF for this. So, and it just has different ways of, different suggestions for doing it. So that's one thing. Then to get to the actual to the alphabet work, you would go to this practices section on the nav bar, and you'll see all of the different alphabet practices. If you go to all, that's where you'll get the little kind of shorthand descriptions of what each one stands for. So say the practice of connections is cultivate the art of making connections, see how your life is intimately related to all life on the planet. If you go down, you'll see something like been talking about reverence. Where is it? Practice reverence for life. The sacred is in, with, and under all the things of the world. Respond with appropriate respect and awe. So this is a general thing. Something that I don't know if you'll have time to get into during your work with the alphabet, but part of it is what we call the spiritual RX prescriptions. And this came out of this second book that we wrote. And what we have discovered over the years is that sometimes people come to religion or spirituality, it's like the old-fashioned way. They were born into a certain tradition. They went to Sunday school or they went to some kind of training at their religious center, and that's how they got into religion. But a lot of times people come to spirituality because some symptom manifests in their life, and they realize that the way they know how to handle it or the way that they've handled it before didn't really work. And so look, for instance, attention, which is where all of the things like the mindfulness practices would go, or is being pushed because people are stressed and distracted, and they would rather be aware. And so they learn to practice attention. You can think of something like being bored. How do you overcome being bored? Well, you overcome being bored by enthusiasm. And so sometimes, when I'm feeling kind of, weird or not sure what I'm feeling, I may look down this list and say, oh yeah, I'm feeling a little sad. So maybe I should look for some joy practices, something to counter that. But maybe I should just recognize that that's something that I'm going to live with for a while. So this is another way of looking, and this is also a way in which people that don't think of themselves as religious at all may still approach the alphabet by seeing it as a way of dealing with certain things that are happening in their lives. I think my favorite one is the practice of you. It's one of my favorite practices anyway. But I love the fact that you is good for if you have low self-esteem or if you suffer from grandiosity, because you encourages humility and you also encourages authenticity. And so it's a very, helpful practice. So that's part of what we're looking, those prescriptions. And then under each one of these, you will find more resources. So let's look at, if we look at beauty, there's a description of the practice, why it might be good for you to think about beauty. And then there's all these over on the side, there's all these different resources. So it could be books that we've found. And it's, as you can imagine, it's kind of hard for us to keep updating all of this material. So some things may not look like the latest books, but you always have at the bottom of the page more books about beauty, and that's going to bring up the most recent ones that we have reviewed first. But just going back to the various resources that are here on the side, spiritual practices. These are ways to practice beauty. Now, typical ways are living simply, clearing clutter, nature walks, the tea ceremony. But there's also, we found some from our own practices database that's on the website, all of these other different ways. And so, sometimes you may want to look at these and see if any of these really resonate with you. So that's kind of the gist of what's there. And then, of course, as I pointed out earlier, if you look at, say, if you look at books, and let's, nowadays everything is under this, most things are under this new DVD and streaming releases. Here's
I think you mean films, not books, but films,
I'm
right?
sorry, films. I'm looking at
Yeah.
films.
Mm-hmm.
You know, here's a this one little film. H is for Happiness. Just a darling film about a young girl whose family's not doing so well. They're suffering from a grief of a loss of another child, and they're just not doing well. And she decides that she's going to try to find a way to make everybody happy. So of course, over here on the side, remember I mentioned we code all of the content according to what practice it illustrates. This is about joy. It's also about kindness. There's a lot of kindness in her. She's in, you know, she has tremendous love for her family and her friends, and it's very imaginative. So it's imagination. And of course, if you click on any of these, you'll get back to that page that we talked about among the practices. But you can also kind of navigate yourself around the site with these keywords. So let's just click on happiness, and it will show you that we have 957 pieces of content coded to happiness. We have art blogs, we have books, we have e-courses, films, practices. So you can kind of curate your own way through. And on that note, I'm going to stop because I could go on forever. This is a fairly robust website, but I'd love to know if you have any questions.
Let's open it up. And please, anybody respond or ask any questions. You've just gotten the big picture of the spiritual alphabet. And we'll be digging in more as the weeks unfold, letter by letter. But how about now? This is your chance to ask Marianne questions of any kind. Anybody have one or a comment?
I do. When you talk about film, do you find that there's very explicitly one? I noticed that you would pair off into a main idea and then several others in the rest of the website, but do you generally land on one particular practice per film, thematically?
Well, what we try to do, we always have choose one as the coded as the main practice, so it shows up on that first, and then others. So yes, we do. It's kind of the programming requires that, but part of that is also a kind of a way of sorting the content, because if we want to say, if somebody is searching for films about compassion, say, we don't want every single film that has a little bit about compassion in it. The search returns would just be too enormous. And so we do make that first connection. And there's usually something that's pretty obvious to us. So yeah, there is the, and that, when I showed you that more books about beauty, or in the under the films, it will say more films. Those are looking for more films where beauty is the main practice, not just every film that we've said has some beauty in it. So yeah.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yeah, Marianne, I'm wondering, what are some of the things that you've seen people do that were especially gratifying to you to use your content, where you get feedback saying, oh yeah, we took this idea and we did this with it?
You know, it's interesting. People talk about movies that they've seen together, or they'll talk about books. But one of the things that one of the things we have, and I don't know if you'll have a chance to use any of this material, but there was a film series made in Canada on spiritual literacy, in which they're half-hour films devoted to 26. They only use the regular alphabet. practices. And we had some pilot groups set up in which we asked them to look at these films, and in looking at them, talk about how they used them and how they applied them. And there was one woman, we got feedback from a retirement community, I think it was in Oregon, from a woman who had watched the film about forgiveness. And one of the passages in that film is a story that Ram Dass tells, the great Hindu teacher who's of blessed memory at this point. And Ram Dass talked about how he has his puja, which is his prayer table, and that he had one point in his life, his entire frustration with the political system was bound up in the presence of Caspar Weinberger, who was the Secretary of Defense. And so he decided to get a picture of Caspar and put it on his puja. And I've heard him talk later, and he keeps changing who's the person. But and so he would get up every morning and he would go to his prayer table, and he would say good morning to his guru and to various of the Hindu deities. And then he would get to Caspar's picture and he would say, "Good morning, Caspar." And he realized that every time his heart constricted a little in speaking to Caspar, that he had more work to do. And this is like Jamal Rahman's statement about recognizing someone's essence as opposed to their actions. And so this woman in this retirement community that was watching the series, they saw this little episode, this little moment in the series in which you see the puja table and you see the incense going up and you see Caspar's picture. And she decided, she was inspired to get a picture of her mother out of storage, because she was an 85-year-old woman and she had had a very bad relationship with her mother and it had never resolved. And so she got a picture of her mother out and she put it on her dresser. And a week later, she came in and told the woman who ran the group that she and her mother had been having a very interesting conversation. And she brought the picture of her mother to show to the supervisor at the place. And she said, this has been very helpful. We've had a good conversation. I feel different now.
Wow.
So this is an example of how a simple story of someone's experience, because let's remember that spirituality is about our experiences. And so for Ram Dass to admit that this had been hard for him to deal with this image every day of someone with whom he profoundly disagreed, but he had the experience of letting his heart open a little bit each day. And that's the kind of thing that, we hope that a lot of people will see these stories, or they'll be inspired by a movie to do something that's transformative. So that's just one of my favorite stories of how the material can be used, but I'm sure there are many others. At least I hope so.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was wonderful.
We probably have time for one more question or comment. Anybody have one? Marianne, am I right or wrong that the films that you did, the Canada films, were used in a prison?
Yes, actually, they're used throughout the Indiana prison system. The Indiana state prisons have a program where the offenders can apply to live in special dorms and have a special programming. And it's a whole variety of things, but they chose spiritual literacy as the spirituality track for these programs. And so they, and I visited a number of them, and it was fascinating to see, and one of them, actually it was a maximum security prison in Indiana, and the men were they were meeting in the main room, their main rec room, but they had figured out that the films had subtitles. And so they had put the subtitles on and they were watching the films, and then they had organized their own discussions. So I just listened in to their discussion. And it was really fascinating to watch them, because there were so many stories in the films, like this one I just told from Ram Dass, that they were interested in and they could relate to. So, and we have since made the films, and we have them available on DVDs, but we've also, now they're available on Vimeo on demand, so people can watch them. So, and then you just have to, you can rent them for like a half an hour for like $2 or something. So that is a way for more, we're hoping more people to take advantage of them, because they're very, the director of the series was in Canada, is a direct student of the Dalai Lama's. He's a Canadian man. And when he read the book and worked with these passages, they're just reading passages from the book, he decided that they could be gateways to meditation. So he slowed down the whole, he had his actors read them slowly and carefully, and they used a lot of evocative music behind them. And so it's, you know, we've had people fall asleep in the middle of one because it's so, but they are, I think they do have that capacity to take you to a different level and help you. So I hope you all, you know, check them out. They're on the, under practices, you'll see spiritual literacy film series as one of the choices, and there's all the information on how to get them. So.
And you offer e-courses, all kinds of e-courses.
Yes, we do.
Past and present. So e-courses that have already occurred, a person can nevertheless take.
Yes.
And you've got so many wonderful people teaching those courses.
Yes, including you.
Well, I wasn't getting at that, but you really do. A remarkable group.
Yeah, we do have wonderful teachers. We partner with a lot of different organizations, and they're multi-faith. So we have courses on a lot of classic practices, we call them, things like everything from you know, zikr to loving kindness meditation to centering prayer, welcoming. We're doing a course on welcoming prayer next month, or starting Monday. Then we have courses on sacred texts, which are really nice. We have a couple. We've got a wonderful course on Rumi's poetry. It's Rumi's birthday today, so I have to shout out that shout out. But and then we have courses on the Tao Te Ching and the Gospel of Thomas, and so there's a lot of those. And as Jay mentioned, the ones that have already run, you can take them on your own schedule. So you just sign up on demand and decide how you want to receive it. And then the current courses, they run with an online forum, and increasingly with some Zoom gatherings as part of them. So there's one coming up on welcoming prayer, as I mentioned. We have one in November on Christian mystics. And so there's a lot of variety. And you can just get on our mailing list, and then we'll keep telling you all about this stuff. So
our hour is up, and Marianne, it's so great that you've been with us, and we've learned so much.
Oh, good.
And we really appreciate the work that you and Frederick have done, the gift that you offer to us and to everyone, So many, many blessings. And I don't know if in our group we bow or clap, so I think we'll do both. There's the bow.
Well,
and then here's the clap.
And I put my hand over my heart.
All right. Yes. Okay. So peace be with everybody, and we'll see you next week for this meeting. Thank you, Marianne.
Thank you, Jay, and Sheila, and Sophia. I mean, yes. All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you very much. We'll see you all.
Thank you.